Here's something that'll blow your mind about rock history. Duane Allman once said Jerry Garcia could walk on water, that he could do anything any man could ever do, that he was a prince. But his own drummer, Butch Trucks, said the Grateful Dead bored him stiff, that they'd just mill around on stage and fall apart in the middle of songs. Two bands that jammed together repeatedly in the early 70s. Two completely opposite memories of the same collaboration. And the divide between them would quietly shape the future of jam band music in ways nobody saw coming. Let's go back to February 11th, 1970. The Fillmore East in New York City. A freezing winter night. And backstage, something legendary was about to happen. The Allman Brothers were still relatively unknown, opening for the Grateful Dead. But what most people don't know is that the Dead's sound engineer, Owsley Stanley, was dosing everyone backstage with pure LSD. Alan Arkish, who worked the Fillmore stage crew, remembers it clearly. They put acid in the water cooler. The entire crew fell one by one. Butch Trucks had more than one beer from a garbage can that Owsley had poured enough pure acid into that the ice water alone would get you totally loaded. By the time they were halfway through their show that night, Trucks was unable to play. But something extraordinary happened anyway. Peter Green and Mick Fleetwood from Fleetwood Mac showed up. Duane Allman and Dickey joined the Dead on stage. And what followed was a jam session that lasted until daylight, when snow was falling on the streets of New York. Phil Lesh walked outside after the show and remembered the audience slowly filing out as musicians gathered behind the amp line, congratulating each other. Mick Fleetwood, heavily dosed, was sitting on the stage with the microphone in his hand as the audience streamed out. He kept going, "The fucking Grateful Dead. The fucking Grateful Dead," like a mantra. Now here's where it gets interesting. That same night, Butch Trucks would later call a total clusterfuck. He remembered every member of the Grateful Dead, every member of the Allman Brothers, and Peter Green and Mick Fleetwood all on stage jamming. He guaranteed it was total cacophony. But listen to the tape. It's not cacophony at all. The music is structured, varied, and audience-friendly throughout. All the players get equal space. No one dominates for long, and there's rarely a moment when you feel they're lost for ideas. Phil Lesh himself called it a surprisingly coherent free-for-all. So what's the truth? Well, it depends on who you ask, and more importantly, what each person was listening for. The guitarists loved each other. Duane Allman told an interviewer in 1971 that Jerry Garcia was one of his favorite people to jam with. Dickey said he always loved Jerry Garcia, that Garcia influenced him, but he didn't try to copy him. When Betts and Garcia talked backstage, it was always while Jerry was playing guitar. Betts remembered Garcia would stop for a minute and talk, then start playing, talk. You know, that's just the way he was. But the rhythm section saw something completely different. Gregg Allman wrote in his autobiography that he never really thought much of the Grateful Dead. He said their music didn't have any groove to it at all. But here's the kicker. Gregg actually played with the Dead. He played organ on that legendary Fillmore East jam, on Dark Star and Lovelight. He was inside the music and still didn't get it. Now, Gregg had personal reasons to dislike Garcia. In 1976, Gregg testified in a trial against the Allmans' road manager for supplying drugs to the band, and Jerry Garcia called him a narc. Gregg wrote that he never really gave two shits for Garcia after that. But Butch Trucks' criticism goes deeper than personal beef. It reveals a fundamental divide in how these two bands understood improvisation. Trucks watched the Dead and saw chaos. He said they would mill around on stage, try songs they didn't know, fall apart in the middle, quit playing, and just stand there looking at the audience. He asked promoter Bill Graham, "What is it?" Graham told him it wasn't about the band. It was about the crowd. The Dead was just the place where the party happens. But here's what Trucks was actually describing. He was seeing the Dead's exploratory approach and interpreting it as incompetence. Because the Allman Brothers came from a completely different philosophy. Dickey Betts said it perfectly. The Grateful Dead wait for it to happen. The Allman Brothers force it to happen. The Allmans rehearsed their jam sections. Gregg Allman said all the arrangements were pre-rehearsed down to the letter, but with the solos, you could take it as long as you want. Their jams were a succession of planned changes and individual solos. Everyone took turns. The band hit clear peaks, and the audience always knew where they were going. Butch Trucks was proud of this. He said, "We never noodle. The song always goes somewhere. We will take a solo and start it out and build it and take it to a peak and get the hell out and go somewhere else." The Dead had a completely different philosophy. Phil Lesh wanted everyone to play off each other simultaneously, not trading solos, but playing at the same time and letting one another's ideas inform what they were doing. More like Dixieland, where everyone is interjecting at all times. Fast forward to July 28, 1973. Watkins Glen, New York. 600,000 people, bigger than Woodstock. The Grateful Dead, the Allman Brothers Band, and the band all played. At the end, they had a closing jam with members of all three groups. Butch Trucks hated it. He called it an absolute disaster. He blamed the mixture of drugs. The band was drunk, the Dead was tripping, and the Allmans were on coke. But the recording tells a different story. The mountain jam from that night has moments of genuine beauty. Garcia and Betts blend together, playing dual guitar lines and building to emotional climaxes. It's not perfect, but it's not garbage either. The problem is, Trucks wasn't hearing what was actually happening. He was listening for Allman Brothers-style focused jams with clear architecture. When he heard the Dead's wandering, exploratory approach, he interpreted it as aimless noodling. And after Watkins Glen, the two bands never played together again. There was one attempt in 1981 to book them in Orlando. It was canceled due to poor ticket sales. By then, the Dead had gone on hiatus and the Allmans were breaking up. But here's what nobody noticed at the time. The divide between these two approaches was quietly splitting the entire jam band scene. In the decades that followed, a whole generation of bands emerged. Fish, Widespread Panic, String Cheese Incident, Umphrey's McGee, and almost all of them followed the Dead's model, not the Allmans model. They prioritized exploration over structure. They embraced uncertainty instead of controlling every peak. They valued the journey over the destination. The Allmans won the battle. They were more commercially successful in the 70s, but the Dead won the war. And here's the final proof. In 2015, a bassist named Oteil Burbridge joined Dead & Company. He'd spent 17 years playing with the Allman Brothers, and he had a unique perspective on both approaches. Oteil said the Allman Brothers were all about yang, deep grooves, and making it happen. But with the Dead, there's much more freedom because Phil's approach is so completely exploratory. He said the Allmans would never play something as subdued as Dark Star for so long. And then he said something revealing. Gregg just does not like long jams. There is none of that in the Dead. Oteil noticed something else too. The Dead will play quietly longer than any band that does arenas. It's so much louder with the Allman Brothers. They were a much more yang band. But the Dead had way more diversity in song forms and a wider scope built into their music. The Allman Brothers disbanded in 2014. Dead & Company has grossed over $100 million annually since 2015. They're still selling out stadiums, while the Allmans' structured approach lives on only through tribute bands and occasional reunions. The Dead's exploratory model didn't just survive. It became the blueprint for modern jam band culture. Warren Haynes, who played in both worlds, put it perfectly. He said playing with the Dead is all about relaxing and letting the music flow through you, not being in a hurry to force it somewhere. That's very different from the Allman Brothers philosophy, which is, let's make it happen right now. So who was right? The Allmans built monuments. Songs like Whipping Post and In Memory of Elizabeth Reed are towering achievements of blues rock architecture. Every note was intentional. Every peak was planned. Every transition rehearsed. The Dead planted seeds. Dark Star and playing in the band weren't destinations, they were launch pads. They never played them the same way twice because they weren't trying to build monuments. They were trying to get lost. Butch Trucks was right that the Dead's jams could be aimless. He was right that they sometimes went nowhere. But he was wrong about what mattered to the audience. Because the Dead weren't trying to take you somewhere specific. They were inviting you to be uncertain with them. And an entire generation of listeners discovered they preferred uncertainty over architecture. In 2009, Bob Weir and Phil Lesh sat in with the Allman Brothers at the Beacon Theater. They played Sugaree, I Know You Rider, and Franklin's Tower. Decades later, and the guitarists were still finding common ground. But the rhythm sections never reconciled because they were listening for fundamentally different things. The Allmans wanted to hear mastery. The Dead wanted to hear discovery. Duane Allman died in 1971. He never got to see which approach would endure, but I think he already knew. He said Jerry Garcia could walk on water, not because Garcia never fell in, but because Garcia was willing to drown in front of 60,000 people. And somehow, that willingness to fail made the moments of transcendence even more powerful. The Allman Brothers forced it to happen, and they created monuments. The Grateful Dead waited for it to happen, and they created a religion. Today, when jam bands take the stage at festivals, they're playing by the Dead's rules. They explore, they wander, they risk failure. They trust that somewhere in the uncertainty, something transcendent might emerge. And somewhere, Butch Trucks is still shaking his head, still insisting they're just noodling, still not understanding why, 50 years later, people are still chasing that feeling. But Duane understood. When he stepped on that Fillmore East stage and surrendered to Jerry Garcia's approach, no, he wasn't trying to force anything. He was just willing to see where the music would take them. And that made all the difference.